It says we're connected. Welcome to the Critical Christian Podcast.
We're your hosts, Dan
and Justin. We ask critical questions about the Bible and provide mostly questionable answers. And we're not professionals here, but we're just reading the text, trying to figure out what's actually being said here. And we've never discovered any plot holes yet, have we?
No.
Not a single one?
No, it's a pretty good book. The writers knew what
that's
for that.
That's for sure. So actually in this part of Genesis, it's my personal opinion that the Joseph narrative seems a little more realistic. Like there's less plot holes, if that makes sense. Like I can buy it as opposed to some of the other stories. Like Sarah being beautiful in her senior citizen years and being kidnapped multiple times. some of the doublets don't.
I mean, I understand, but I'm not sure any of this is because you have to believe that Joseph would have even get in the
right
in that position.
Well, that's something we can talk about. In fact, we'll touch on that today.
And we will.
I know. We're definitely going to touch on that today. So we're in chapter 42 of Genesis, which means we're getting closer towards the end. And Jacob is currently on his deathbed. And if he's anything like his father, he's not on his deathbed yet, but he's old.
He'll be there for
Exactly. If he's anything like Isaac, he'll be dying for 40 or 50 years. Joseph is in Egypt. The brothers are in Canaan. And there is a famine.
There is.
And they need food.
That they do.
And they're going to go discover food in Egypt. Let's get into it. Can you read the first two verses for us, Dan?
Oh, yes.
I have no idea.
Did I click on it?
I think that just means the stream has got a weak connection.
Good.
Well, yeah, but remember we're live. Everything that you're doing right now.
Just cut it out.
We're not cutting any of this out. Everything's live.
Pretty disagree.
Are you going to just read the verse?
All right. When Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt, Jacob said to his sons, "Why do you look at one another?" And he said, "Indeed, I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down to that place and buy for us there, that we may live and not die." Which is how it works to live and not die.
Right. This is one of those passages where, like, I wonder why the author or the narrator or, whoever was putting the story down, why they felt the need to tell the audience that, hey, guys, if we don't have food, we're going to die. Like, are they thinking that people don't know this?
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit interesting. Now, I was thinking a little bit about grain last week. Because we were talking about how Egypt, even before I'm dying. I'm sorry, something on my throat there. Even before Joseph goes into Egypt and tells Pharaoh, like, hey, you need to store a bunch of grain up for 7 years, right? Well, we already knew that Egypt was in the habit of storing up grain. It wasn't news to them. So when I started this chapter, I was met pretty immediately with something interesting. If you read through our English translation, we're using the New King James, which I like the New King James. It's perfectly fine, but this is one of those passages where I think they glossed over something. The word that is actually used for grain is sheker or shaver, and the typical word for grain is dagon. Now, interestingly enough, we've talked about this before. As it turns out, the word for grain, the primary word Dagon, guess what? In Canaanite is the god of grain. Because everything from Canaanite culture got put into Israelite culture. But anyways, that being said, the most usual word for grain doesn't actually show up here. The word that we get is shever. And this word means a measure or a ration of grain. It doesn't just generically typically get used to refer to grain. So you'll see the same word that gets used when it talks about how animals chew the cud. In Hebrew, they actually say that a measure of grain comes up. That's how they describe cud, right? And elsewhere, we can see the same word being used to refer to measures of grain being used as like payment, for something, right? So I only say all that to say this. It's possible here that Jacob is not saying go buy grain. He might be saying go buy rations. Like, he knows that Egypt is in the habit of selling rations of grain during times of famine, which I think would lead credence to what we were positing last week, which is namely, I don't think it's anything new that the Egyptians were storing grain for the times of famine. So now I could be all wrong. This is all speculation. I'm just saying it seems to me that Joseph's miracle of storing up grain isn't that great of a miracle.
Yeah, boy, that was yeah. Glad I learned that.
Right.
Instead of grain, it's a bit of grain, something, a ration.
A ration of grain, yeah.
Now I understand that. All right.
Just looking at the little details,
Yeah. Big picture.
Let's do verses 3 and 4.
So Joseph's 10 brothers went down to buy a ration of grain in Egypt, but Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he said, lest some calamity befall him. Now looky here. Guess we got ourselves a new favorite son. I guess he better not accept any rain.
No, I mean, actually, that's something interesting. What would happen if Jacob gave Benjamin a rainbow, Technicolor dream coat, just like he did the other brother? How would that end, do you suspect?
We'll have another, guy who's in.
Yeah. So I was thinking about why Joseph is.
Why doesn't he, though? I think it's because Jacob kind of suspects.
That's a good point. Is it possible that Jacob learned from his past behavior of favoring Joseph and is like, I ain't going to make that mistake again?
Right. Does that mean he assumes, nobody killed him? But.
Right.
Sons are all terrible.
Well, they appear to be awful people so far.
Yeah.
They're like raping and pillaging villages and having sex with Jacob's concubine, so on and so forth. Yeah, they don't strike me.
That's less bad, but yeah, I get you.
Yeah, they just don't strike me as like these great God-fearing children yet.
No.
But it's interesting here that the new favorite is Benjamin. And interestingly enough, you're never going to guess whose brother, full brother, not half brother, because remember, there's 4 women that gave birth to all 12 sons.
Yeah.
The mother of Benjamin was Rachel. Remember, Rachel died giving birth to Benjamin.
Yeah, and he was going to get a really depressing name.
Right, and Jacob saved him from getting that terrible name.
Yeah.
And so that's definitely one reason why Benjamin might be somewhat favored, because remember, Rachel was the favored wife.
Right, yeah.
And she was mostly barren. There was only one other child born to Rachel, and that was Joseph.
What was the age difference?
Actually, I forget. It was somewhat significant, though.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it could be as much as 20 years difference.
Oh, that's a lot.
Because remember, he served Laban for 20 years before he left, and Benjamin was born after he left, right?
Okay.
So there's some fuzzy math in there we could go back and do, but it seems like they're pretty far apart.
All right, gotcha.
But that being said, it's interesting here that both of Jacob's favorite sons are the only 2 children born to Rachel, the only woman he actually wanted at the beginning of this whole thing.
Rachel gave birth to other children, right?
No, I would think it's just those two.
Just because all the others were owned.
Right, because initially Rachel was barren, and it was the task was handed over to her concubine. Was hers Bilhah? I forget.
Not really sure.
Anyways, the long and short of it is Rachel, the beloved wife.
Yeah, you know what? That makes sense. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's probably why Jack.
I definitely have that suspicion that if the story is as what we're reading it, I think that's the thing that kind of ties those two children to Jacob that says, well, maybe this is why he favored them. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, what kind of precedent does that set in the household? That your only two favored sons come from the one wife. Now, it could also be too, and this is again more speculation. What if it's not necessarily that that she was the favorite wife? What if it's more or less the fact that she's now passed away, and these two child are the only remaining piece of Rachel?
Well, I mean, that's pretty similar. Yeah.
Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's kind of like when my dad passed away, anything I had from my dad, I like held on to with an iron fisted grip because that's all I had left of him, right? So I'm thinking maybe this is kind of how Joseph sees these two children. This is all I have left of my beloved first wife, who I served no less than 14 years for.
Yeah.
Right?
And they must have been in love.
Right.
All right. It's getting sadder.
I know, it's a tough one. It's a tough passage. Now, okay, I had one other verse I wanted to read based on this speculation. This is Genesis 44:20, so in a couple of chapters. It says, "And we said to my Lord, we have a father, an old man, and a child of his old age, who is young. His brother is dead, and he alone is left to his mother's children, and his father loves him." I'm curious if the brothers themselves, because they're telling this to somebody else at this point in Genesis 44. I think this is being told to Joseph when they come back. I'm curious if the brothers themselves understand that there's kind of a sad story behind the family lineage, right? Like they understand that because it says that his brother's dead and he alone is the only one left of his mother's children. So even the brothers kind of know, like, hey, this woman only had two children, and one of them's already gone. So we cannot very well let her only son pass away or perish, because remember, it was the son of the woman who would sustain her in their old age.
Surprised that still going on mentioning.
Yeah, well,
I mean, this whole time, the whole time they're saying this, are they just looking at each other going?
I don't know if that's something that you really want to own up to unless somebody like presses you for that information.
I mean, do they just forget it? You know, is this mob mentality?
I suspect a lot of it is like even because it seems like the brothers are remorseful. Okay, but if I had to guess, I'd say there's a big part of them that's kind of like, how can we put this behind us?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We'll never talk about this ever again. You know,
unless any killer. In which case, we're bringing it out again.
I mean, I would honestly really be curious to know how the story would work out if Jacob gave him the same damn coat.
Right.
Oh man, should we read the next section, verses 6 through 9? All right, let's see what happens here.
All right. Now Joseph was governor over the land. It was he who sold to all of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed down before their faces to the earth. Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but he acted as a stranger to them and spoke roughly to them. he said to them, "Where do you come from?" And they said, "From the land of Canaan to buy food." So Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize. Then Joseph remembered the dreams which he had dreamed about them and said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see the nakedness." Kind of confused here. Before we began reading Genesis, I intended to say some really mean things about Joseph and his treatment of his brothers. I mean, I remember this going, man, I can't wait to talk about Joseph because everybody thinks he's whatever, and I'm like, no, he's actually kind of like what's the word? Not a nice person.
A jerk.
A jerk. Yes, that's yeah. But they did.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the brothers, they're not good people. So I expected to read this getting a spoiled little Joseph, but now I just don't feel kind of like they deserve all the best.
Yeah, I agree because like so far in the narrative, Joseph, despite all his hardships, despite being a spoiled little brat when he was younger, he behaves really well. Like he behaves honorably. He behaves in a way that is like a role model for others. And the narrator goes like above and beyond to paint him as everybody who meets him falls in love with him and recognizes that God is with him.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the brothers, we don't see any of that with the brothers. Like all the brothers, like what we hear about them seems to paint them in a bad light. Has Genesis said anything good about the brothers yet?
Well, Judah.
Well, Judah theoretically tried to salvage Joseph as opposed to let him,
Right. Yeah.
him and Reuben both. So both Reuben and Judah tried to save Joseph from death.
That might have just been, later.
Right, but up to this point, has any of the sons of Jacob been spoken about in a favorable light?
No, and I don't think they even know how that works. You have 11 brothers, you kill one of them, and that's it.
Yeah, I
So
get it.
I'm just saying there's clearly no remorse.
Well, I think there is remorse. I just think that what can you do about it? Are you going to tell your father? You can't tell your father that. What do you tell the authorities? I'm sure they're remorseful for it, and we see that later in the story. They definitely appear to be remorseful for what they did. But I think in that particular situation, it's kind of like, okay, well, whether they're remorseful or not, what can you do? What's done is done. They probably all assume that Joseph is either dead or in captivity.
Boy, if I were one of the brothers and again, that would be such a weight off of my shoulders.
Actually, you know what? I just at the moment had a thought. They sold him as a slave. Okay. There's nothing that was preventing them after time had passed and they became remorseful. There's literally nothing that prevented them from just going to Egypt, figuring out who owned him, because remember, they know who bought him. The Ishmaelites did. They could probably go to the Ishmaelites and be like, okay, well, who'd you sell him to, right? They could probably track their brother down and redeem the brother. They can probably put their money together and buy their brother's freedom. But that never happened.
Actually, yeah. Still would prefer to not.
Well,
that's more important.
I mean, that's a real thing because let's say, for example, they go to Egypt, they bail their brother out, and they redeem him. They buy him whatever the slave fee is and bring him home.
Mm-hmm.
Well, obviously, you can't do that without admitting what you've done. So maybe they were remorseful, but not remorseful enough to turn themselves in. You know what I mean?
So I don't know. Honestly, I was just expecting to really kind of rail on Joseph. I guess I'm disappointed.
Because you wanted to bite into him, huh?
Yeah, because everybody else thought he was so great. And I'm like, no, here's what you're missing. But I was the one missing.
I get that.
Very embarrassing.
I actually kind of like the guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially because so far in Genesis, there's not a ton of really likable people,
This is really very true. Yeah.
right? Like most of the characters that we've heard about in Genesis, we have a lot of complaints with. I mean, how even Abraham, supposed to be like the role model of the faith. I mean, the dude sent his concubine out into the desert with her child to basically die.
Right.
With like almost no food and almost no water, no real provisions to speak of. Yeah, anyways, the long and short of it is Joseph, kind of like him.
Yeah.
He's likable. Should we read the next passage, verses 10 through 12?
Sure. And they said to him, "No, my lord, but your servants have come to buy food. We are all one man's sons. We are honest men. Your servants are not spies." But he said to them, "No, but you have come to see the nakedness." So, very, very stupid. Because ain't nobody trying to fight Egypt unless they want their butts kicked. I mean, who could they belong to that would actually get Egypt? Weren't they the strongest, greatest power for like 1,500 years? It says the Pharaohic period lasts much less, 300 years, but that's still a lot of time. I can only imagine the brothers southern whispering, "What is this guy talking about?" You know?
Yeah.
It wasn't even a believable, story that Joseph was saying. Yeah.
Well, it's one of those things where it kind of depends on how you date this chronicle. Because if we date it to like the second intermediate period, which is maybe 100 to 300 years before the Exodus, it really depends on how you date the Exodus too. It's possible that this was happening during like the build up to the Hyksos period. So there was a period in the like the 1800s all the way down to the middle of the 1400s, where a bunch of Canaanites started to infiltrate the land, as well as a bunch of Asiatics and even some people of unknown origin, just referred to as the Sea People. There was a bunch of people during this time period that were kind of going into Egypt, but their numbers became a little bit overwhelming. And some of them were actually starting wars with Egypt. So one foe during this time period, they weren't necessarily trying to infiltrate Egypt, but they were like a long-term enemy that were still active during this period, was the Nubians. If you take the Nile River south, you'll end up where the Nubians are. And at certain points in history, they made war with Egypt, and at certain points of history, not so much. But during this point in history, they were for sure eyeing up Egypt, because Egypt was kind of weak at this time period.
Egypt was ever weak.
They were in a little bit of a decline at this time period, and that's why the infiltration of the Canaanites or the Hyksos people, that's why they were able to actually rise to power within Egypt. In fact, so many of them migrated into Egypt. Not all that dissimilar to what we read in the Bible. So many Semitic speaking people from the land of Canaan infiltrated Egypt at this particular point in time, that they were actually able to gain power. And there was a period in time, the Hyksos era, in which literally Canaanites ran Egypt. So anyways,
true?
It is absolutely true. Yeah.
How did that happen?
So many of them, it's actually really interesting. It shows up in history somewhat similar to what we find in like the biblical narrative, where a bunch of Semitic speaking people become so great because they become so large and powerful within the kingdom that they start taking over leadership positions. And then eventually we have a period of time in which they were actually in the highest positions in the land. There was like Hyksos pharaohs. And this kind of culminated near the beginning and middle of the 1400s, and Egypt started to fight back against all these foreign newcomers, and they expelled a ton of them, almost all of them, in the middle of the 1400s. So we know if these people are coming from Canaan, and they are, And if these people look like the rest of the people who came from Canaan, and they probably did, it's very quite likely that at this period of time, because we can't date this narrative precisely, we can only guess. It's possible that these people, the sons of Jacob, were coming into Egypt at a time in which there was a huge inflow of foreigners coming into the land and starting to create a bit of a headache for the Egyptians.
Huh. So what you're saying is not as far.
Right. This
Or-
is
or-
actually for the time period it seems very accurate. Egypt definitely would have been on the lookout for people from the land of Canaan.
Well, I also mean Joseph being like second in command. I mean,
Yeah.
if there was the
Yeah, the Hyksos.
and I know there's some talk,
Well, they were from the same territory as the Israelites.
but they might have been the Israelites.
Well, it's a little bit anachronistic because the Israelites, theoretically, there was only like 70 of them that went down into Egypt.
70 Israelites.
Yeah, 70 Israelites went down into Egypt. So that means that the majority...
You're talking about Jacob and his clan?
Yeah. The majority of the people who
Were there
ended
any other Israelites other than Jacob and his clan at this point?
No. Which means
he was already called Israel at this point.
Right.
Okay, I'm going to let you speak.
So I just say that the people, according to the biblical narrative, didn't infiltrate Egypt in large numbers and then get kicked out. They infiltrated Egypt in a pretty small number, and then they grew so numerous and powerful, and then they were kicked out. And I think that's one of the big differences, because according to the history, it looks like there was a pretty big inflow of people from Canaan during this time period. Now, it's also possible, too, that the 70 members of Israel's family were just one of many groups of Semitic-speaking peoples from Canaan.
You mean Jacob's family?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm confused.
So it's possible that they were one of many families who went down into Egypt. And it's possible that when they became powerful, when they grew in the land of Egypt, they might not have been possible to differentiate between their clan and the other Canaanites.
Mm-hmm.
They could very well have, at some point in their 400 years down there, just kind of mixed with other Semitic people from the land. And then after the end of 400 years, there's no way to know the difference. All you know is those people are not Egyptians. You know what I mean? They would have looked... Oh yeah, the Canaanites definitely would have looked different from the Egyptians, and their social customs were very different.
But the Canaanites and Israelites...
Yeah.
they were living together.
Exactly.
You like to think that you were talking about how the Israelites...
Yeah, almost everything we know about Israelite culture, we can find in the history and archaeology of the Canaanites. Just like we said before, most of the deities in Canaanite mythology show up in the Hebrew language. The sea deity Yam is the Hebrew word for sea. The deity of grain and the harvest, Dagon, is literally the Hebrew word for corn or for grain. And up and down the list, we can find the Leviathan. The Leviathan is in Canaanite mythology. Elohim, that is a word from Canaanite mythology. Baal is a deity from Canaanite mythology. So much of what we know about not just the Hebrew Bible and the people that we read about it, as far as we can tell, that there's a huge amount of crossover with Canaanite culture. And even King Saul named one of his sons after Baal. Ishbaal was his name. It means a man of Baal.
Saul was
a not so great king. Yeah, he was the first king over Israel.
We'll get to that.
Right. And I forget, there's somebody in Judges that names their child after the Canaanite deity Anath. There's tons of people in the Bible that name their children after Canaanite deities, which
Like a bad.
it kind of makes you wonder, like, were these people like actually just Canaanites
Mm-hmm.
that later identified as Israelites? And there's a lot of questions there. But anyways, all that to say, we know from history that a bunch of people from the land of Canaan went down into Egypt. They grew, they became numerous, they became powerful. They even took over power in Egypt, and eventually the Egyptians had
Is there a proof Canaanite pharaoh?
yes,
Literal.
we legitimately know their names. We actually have material culture. We have stuff in archaeology that testifies to some of their names. Like you can go out and look up the names of the Hyksos kings that were in power over Egypt.
Well, then I'm not surprised that they were able to infiltrate.
Right.
Except a little more confusing how they were kicked out.
Well, that's the thing is, according to history, I mean, remember, history is told by different angles. According to the Egyptians, they conquered and kicked out the Hyksos people.
Mm-hmm.
If we attribute the Hyksos people to the Canaanites, then according to the biblical narrative, you know, their God smote the Egyptians and allowed them to escape. But the reality is, like, it's hard to
Wait, you're talking about when Moses came,
yeah.
and you're trying to tell me that while it looks to us as though God helped them, the Egyptians might think of it differently, as though they're them.
Yeah.
If that made sense.
Yeah, according to the Egyptian Chronicle, they had to fight a war against the Hyksos people and kick them out of the land. Like, they didn't want them there. And according to the biblical narrative, it was the opposite. They were slaves in Egypt and they couldn't leave, and their God had to deliver them, which is a little bit ironic because where'd they deliver them to? They deliver them into the land of Canaan. But during that time period, during the Exodus time period, the land of Canaan was literally owned by Egypt. Like they ran the whole thing all the way up to the Hittite country. So it's hard to know how you actually escaped Egypt when you escaped Egypt and crossed into a land that was kind of owned and operated by Egypt until like 1170 when there was the late Bronze Age collapse, and then Egypt withdrew their power from Canaan.
So, do we have any history? I mean, you're telling me there was a mass exodus like this. This
Yeah.
is historically true.
Yes, there is 100% a mass exodus of Canaanite or Semitic-speaking people
Okay.
from Egypt.
So, is there any whether they tried to leave or what I mean?
Yeah, that's
Like
what
which side is true?
that's what we don't know. We don't really know which narrative from history is the most accurate, but I'm inclined to believe that most likely they were just kicked out of Egypt. Because we read similar stories in the Old Testament when we compare them to the accounts from the ancient Near East. The biblical narrative always flowers it up.
First, I mean, if they were kicked out, there were plagues.
Right. And interestingly enough, we know that during this time period, Egypt was experiencing plagues. The whole time period around the Exodus, there were great outbreaks of plagues in Egypt.
And, like
Historically, they were documented in Egypt, and not just in Egypt. The plague in Egypt was so bad that when the Hittites went to war against the Egyptians, so the Hittites actually at one point had to go to war with the Egyptians, and the soldiers that went to war caught the plague from them, brought it back to the Hittite nation, and the plague was so bad. A lot of people think it was the precursor to like the bubonic plague. The plague was so bad that almost half the kingdom died, and they spent almost 200 years before the plague left them. It's one of the reasons why the Hittite Empire was basically crushed during this time period. And the Hittites wrote about the plagues extensively, and a lot of them understood that it was because they went to go war in Egypt. They knew they got it from Egypt. King Mursili wrote about it. King Mursili is a very famous king. I think he's the second, King Mursili II, wrote tons of prayers and tons of requests to his God for.
One of the plagues was.
What do you mean?
Well, there were, 10 plagues?
Well, that's what I'm saying. According to the Bible, there were 10 different plagues, but if you're just reading history, like a plague is a plague. You know what I mean? They don't really say what it is. It's possible that, like, when I think there was a plague of boils, right? It's possible that the plague of boils is what they would have associated with the type of plague that was transmitted to the Hittites.
But wasn't there a plague or something?
Yeah, but I think
So how's that?
what I'm saying, it's all fluff.
Meaning?
Meaning the core of the story might be true. It might be that there was a huge plague that broke out in Egypt, so bad that it spread all the way up to the Hittite countries. But to say that there was a divine manifestation where frogs were raining down from the sky, and all the cattle died 4 different times.
Right.
Because remember, the cattle died like 3 times. And then all the children of the firstborn were unalive. It's more probable from history, at least as far as we can tell, that there was just a really bad plague in the land, just like the plague that hit Europe in the Black Death.
Mm-hmm.
We know for sure that there was a plague in history. A lot of countries wrote about it. The biblical narrative appears to be a fluffy narrative in which they added their own religious and political content to maybe a kernel of historical truth.
So you don't think there were plagues?
No. Do I think there was a plague? Absolutely.
And the Israelites wanted to have it.
Well, it could have been God's doing.
I mean, they wanted it.
Well, they wanted it, of course.
I'm saying.
Every time Israelite, we read the biblical story and we compare it to the historical narrative from the other countries, the biblical story is always built up. It's clear that they have like a religious viewpoint that they're trying to embed. It's a cultural narrative that they're building. Whereas when you read it in the other texts, they're just like, yeah, we went to war with them and we either got our butts whooped or we whooped their butts, one of the two. They leave out all the God stuff.
All right. Well, Moses was real, right?
It's possible. I mean, we have testimony from people claiming that he was real, but nothing from his time period.
All right.
So like the Greeks and the Romans wrote about Moses, but they only wrote about Moses because they lived among the Jews who spoke about him. Right?
I don't know.
But anyways, the long and short of it is there was a bunch of people from Canaan that went into Egypt at this time period, and Egypt had every reason to believe that spies were infiltrating the land.
That's what
we're talking about, the spies. Yeah, then we got off on a long rabbit trail.
We're going to do that again.
I know.
It's going to be...
Yep. Let's read verses 13 through 17.
All right. And they said, your servants are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And in fact, the youngest is with our father today, and one is no more. But Joseph said to them, it is as I spoke to you, saying you are spies. In this manner you shall be tested. By the life of Pharaoh you shall not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of you and let him bring your brother. And you shall be kept in prison, that your words may be tested to see whether there is any truth in you. Or else, by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies. So he put them all together in prison 3 days. This plan is just brilliant in its simplicity. Surely, if you have a younger brother, if they have a younger brother, this will prove they're not thieves. I mean,
I know. I had a lot of thoughts on this.
Yeah.
They
just find some.
Right. So I think this narrative, um, I think it makes more sense if you're reading the narrative from Joseph's point of view, and because if you're reading it from the brother's point of view, there's too many things that don't make sense. For example, as you pointed out, how does bringing the brother there validate that they're not spies? It says nothing. Second of all, how in the world, from the brother's point of view, how in the world would the person quizzing them know that they brought their brother back? They could go grab any random dude and say, "Hey, this is our brother." Yeah. You know what I mean? So from the brother's point of view, they're got to be thinking like, none of this makes sense.
Right.
And then on top of this, he tells us to go send one person to go get the brother, but then he puts us in prison for 3 days. Right? Because they're in prison now for 3 days. He says, "Send one of you and let him bring your brother.
Yeah.
And you shall be kept in prison, that your words may be tested to see whether or not there's any truth in you, or else by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies." So he put them all together in prison for 3 days.
Yeah.
So nobody went back home.
I mean, they did after the 3 days.
Right, exactly. After the 3 days, he has a change of heart, right? But now, so none of this makes sense if you're a brother. You're like, first of all, how would he know?
Right.
Second of all, how would this prove that we're not spies? Third of all, if he wanted us to go get our brother, why are we in prison? Now, if you're looking at this from Joseph's viewpoint, I think a few things come kind of clear. One, I don't know if Joseph cares if any of this makes sense to them. I think, one, he's tormenting them a little bit of payback, or else there's no reason to put him in jail for 3 days, right? Maybe he's putting them in the tank together for a couple days to let them fight amongst themselves and punish each other a little bit, fighting and arguing about, okay, well, who's going to be the one brother that goes back so that we're not all stuck here? Because that's going to be a big old fight.
Yeah.
Why are you the one that gets to go back, right? So maybe some of this, from Joseph's point of view, doesn't have to make sense. Maybe he's just really pushing all their buttons at the same time to give them a little bit of hell. But if we're looking at it from Joseph's point of view, bringing back the brother starts to make a little bit of sense. Because Joseph's goal, obviously, is not to find out if they're spies. He knows they're not spies. He knows who they are. Okay? His goal, obviously, is to get Benjamin back there. Right, that's the thing. The reason why he wants to get Benjamin back there is because he's 3 steps ahead. He's 4 steps ahead of the reader right now. He's already planning that he's going to use the youngest brother, who he knows is the new favorite. He knows is the only child left because he's the half brother, or he's the brother, from Rachel. So he knows that Benjamin there's like a lot riding on him staying alive. And he is going to threaten the life of Benjamin later. Remember, Benjamin gets framed for a crime. He wants to see if his brothers will go to bat for Benjamin if Benjamin gets himself in trouble. He wants to see if the brothers have become remorseful. And if you read further in the story, and you already read it, they offer their lives in place of Benjamin, indicating that they have learned their lesson, right? So I think all this setup, if we have the understanding here that Joseph's goal is to get Benjamin there merely so he can determine if they've actually learned their lesson and are actually remorseful, then I think it starts making sense.
Okay.
I think the whole goal is to get Benjamin there.
I mean, I don't know why he expect his.
Well, yeah. It's possible. Right. Well, it doesn't go off perfectly, as we're going to read. It eventually works, but it doesn't go off perfectly. Let's keep reading. Let's jump into verses 18 to 21, because It doesn't happen as seamlessly as Joseph plans.
Then Joseph said to them the third day, "Do this and live. You are honest men. Let one of your brothers be confined to your prison house. But you go and carry grain for the famine of your houses, and bring your youngest brother to me, so your words will be verified." And how would Joseph know if this new person is actually? I mean, he would, but assuming he, you know what I'm saying. I mean,
Yeah, there's no way he would know.
right.
But I think that's okay because Joseph's in charge. He can make any request he wants, whether that request makes sense or not. And I think his goal here is to put fear in the hearts of his brothers, and then also to get Benjamin back there.
Mm-hmm.
Now something interesting happens in this particular passage,
Mm-hmm.
and that is he says that I fear God.
Right.
Joseph says that to the brothers. Who's God? Right.
Yeah.
And who worships the God? Not the Egyptians.
Right, yeah. So that should have been a tip off, huh?
It's kind of something,
Do
but
you think that was like an accident? He's like, "Oh, hope I didn't give it away."
right. Well, that's the thing. So I went back and I just checked it in Hebrew real quick, and obviously it doesn't say God. It could easily be translated as the gods.
Oh,
It's Ha Elohim, which quite often in the Old Testament just gets translated as the gods. So it's not clear here, because there's no verbs associated with the word either to tell us. It's not clear here if he's saying, I believe in God, or I believe in the gods.
okay.
But if in fact he said God instead of gods, he would definitely raise some eyebrows, right?
But he wouldn't say the gods, though.
I think he would say the gods.
I don't think he would. Because, above everything else, he in good with God. And that feels like one of those things that I don't know. That
Right.
made sense. It's kind of like.
But what if he's trying to not blow his cover?
I'm just saying, even if you're deep undercover, I don't know if you do that.
I don't think so.
I don't know.
It's hard to say, and unfortunately, the text that we have does not clarify. It uses the typical plural formation for God and gods.
Maybe we need to check.
That's what I'm saying. Is
No. I'm gonna.
right. It's chapter 42, verse. Is it 20?
Maybe.
Yeah, it's 18.
What's the message says? Do no live a God for.
Right. Yeah, but the message is not a translation.
You know what? It seems like all of them. They just expect that.
Because they want to make sure that Joseph is monotheistic.
Oh, so they kind of have
Yeah, but the fact of the matter is, we don't know who he's referring to here. He could be saying God. He could be saying the gods. It's the identical same word. Now, what's interesting is he says Ha Elohim, which when you're referring to the God, typically that gets translated as the gods, because you don't say I fear the God. That's not something that really comes off the tongue very often.
Okay, but do we?
That's what I'm saying.
What they're called.
If you read the Old Testament in Hebrew,
yeah,
it doesn't. When Elohim shows up, he doesn't. Sometimes he does, but he doesn't usually show up. People don't refer to him as the Elohim often. It does happen. But when someone's saying just something general about Elohim, they usually just refer to him as Elohim. Okay. So in this particular case, it seems plausible that since it says the Elohim, it's possible that he's saying, I believe in the gods.
So that's even likely.
I think it's actually more likely, and I mean, we don't fully know in this time period if they're even monotheistic. We don't have any indication of that. And here's an interesting passage, okay? This is hundreds of years later. This is 1 Samuel, so it's obviously way after the Exodus already.
Mm-hmm.
And this is when the Philistines go to war with Israel. And the Philistines capture the Ark of the Lord. It says, when they learn, the Philistines that is, when they learned that the Ark of the Lord had come into the camp, the Philistines were afraid. A god has come into the camp, they said. Oh no, nothing like this has ever happened before. We're doomed. Who will deliver us from the hand of these mighty gods, plural? They're the gods who struck the Egyptians with all kinds of plagues in the wilderness. So the Philistines, who interacted with the Israelites often, weren't even aware that they were monotheists.
Oh.
They had no idea they were monotheists.
That's kind of a surprise. And that kind of their, the Israelites are the God.
Right. It's generally assumed in history and academia that the Israelites weren't strict monotheists until well after the Babylonian deportation. They typically believed, and we've talked about it before, in a henotheistic system where other gods existed, but it was the one true God, Yahweh, or the highest God, or the best God, that was their God. It wasn't that no other gods existed.
Do you think, I'll just say it, do you think God was okay with that because the other gods were real gods?
Yeah.
Because, I know there was a book I read that you told me to read that.
By Michael Heiser. I don't disagree with all of it.
Yeah, but, basically he said that the early gods were actually, but they were like, God had set them.
Yes, there were 70 lesser gods.
That's why God was only the God of Israel.
Yeah.
Because there were other gods who took care of the other ones. So what I'm saying is, could this possibly be proof that that's true? Because otherwise God would have been really like, whoa, you're still worshiping other gods?
Yeah, I think so. And let's read Deuteronomy 32 real quick. There's something that mentioned in Deuteronomy 32:8, referring to the dividing of the nations according to their gods. It says, when the Most High, El Elyon, apportioned the nations, he divided humankind, and he fixed the boundaries of the people according to the number of the gods. The Lord's own portion was his people, Jacob, his allotted share. So there seems to be pretty good evidence from the Bible that at least in the early period, they were like okay with the idea that other divine entities existed.
Yeah.
They just believed that their divine entity was like the best of them, which everyone believed, right? Everyone believed that their specific divine entity is like the coolest and the best, right?
Yeah. So maybe that's what's going on. Yeah, I know.
Right. Yeah. Well, not just that. I mean, God's not really speaking here. It's just Joseph.
Yeah, but
right.
I assume if God was upset with Joseph worshiping or acknowledging other, God would probably smite him or something.
Right.
He'd at least say, "Hey, no, it's just me."
Right. Yeah. If Joseph here is saying that I fear the gods, I don't think Yahweh has a problem with that. You know what I mean? Especially remember he's in Egypt, and obviously his brothers, if they believe he's Egyptian, which this is one plot hole I'm not so sure about. I don't know how well you can change your appearance to look like an Egyptian when you're a Canaanite.
I don't.
But I mean, regardless, they would have expected him to worship many gods.
And I mean, there was another god that Egypt.
Well, there's a whole pantheon of deities in Egypt.
Yeah, but there's got to be over all of them.
I mean, they were known as the land of the gods.
That's incredible. But there had to have been one over top of all of them.
Yeah, like everybody. It's always the sun god. It's like Ra, right? Everyone thinks like the sun god is the highest god because he's the biggest thing in the sky. He's the sun. You hit that every week.
I do.
You've got 2 more left this week. I don't know why you hit that thing every week. Anyways, yeah.
Wait, so if everybody worships Ra, the sun god, as their best one, they don't have individual.
Well, that's the thing about pantheons, is just because one, there might be a high deity, I mean, the ranking changes. There was a time period in which Elohim, or El, was the highest ranking deity in the Canaanite pantheon, and then Baal became the highest ranking deity in the pantheon. There was a time when Marduk was not the highest ranking deity in the Babylonian pantheon, but then he defeated Tiamat and became the highest ranking deity in the pantheon. So they're just like human kingdoms, the deities shuffled and changed and made war with each other.
So am I to believe that actually happened, or that these were just storytellers changing the story around?
That what actually happened?
That there were many different deities constantly fighting each other.
I mean, that's what everyone believed about their individual deities, that they behaved much like humans did in their realm.
Well, I mean, assuming that this is true, which I think we were trying to.
What's true?
That there were deities.
Oh, I mean that there was a deity assigned to each nation?
Yeah.
Yeah, but the Egyptians didn't believe that. That's a Canaanite belief.
Oh.
You know. All I'm saying is that Joseph's brothers would have expected him to be Egyptian, and they would have expected him to worship many gods.
Okay. Hey,
Mm-hmm.
I don't really know what Canaanites and Egyptians looked like. Do they have some characteristics that would make it hard for you to pretend to be one?
Yeah, in fact, if you look at the Egyptian hieroglyphs, and I apologize, I didn't put any notes down for this, but if you look at the Egyptian hieroglyphs, they depict the Canaanites very differently than how they depict the Egyptians. You can clearly tell that there seems to be a difference.
Is it, or do they just not like them, and so they're going to treat them differently?
No, both. I mean, the way they dress, their skin tone. Sometimes their size is indicated as being different than the Egyptians. I mean, you can tell that the Egyptians believe that there was a difference between the Egyptians and the Canaanites. Remember, as we learned earlier in was it chapter 41, that Joseph didn't even sit at the same meal table with his brothers because the Egyptians and the Canaanites didn't eat meals together. You had to completely Egyptianize yourself before you can be accepted into the culture. Like, you had to become circumcised. You had to change your clothing out. You couldn't wear animal clothing anymore. You had to wear, naturally made fabrics and things like that. A lot of them shaved their heads. So anyways.
You're saying they had to be circumcised to be thought of as an Egyptian?
Oh yeah, the Egyptians practiced circumcision.
Well, yeah, but so did the Israelites.
Right. Yeah.
So that wouldn't have been much different.
No, that they had the same. The difference is that the Egyptians did it when you were an adult, and the Israelites did it on the 8th day.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
Which is,
different.
At least you don't have any memories of it.
Yeah, yeah.
All that to say, back at the bar here.
Yeah.
Joseph's brothers, I assume, expected him to worship multiple gods.
Okay.
That would be the expectation from a leader in Egypt. So I don't think it's incongruent here to assume.
But you already said that a lot of Canaanites already infiltrated that position of power, right?
Right.
So it may not be that a non-Egyptian.
Right, but that being said, the Canaanites worship multiple gods too. So again, there's actually not a reason here to translate this passage as "I fear God," because whether they know he's Canaanite or half Canaanite, half Egyptian, or full Egyptian, no matter what the case is, they have to believe that that person worships multiple gods, because according to the narrative, the only people on the planet who could even come close to being monotheistic are those 12 sons.
And Jacob and his,
Right.
right? Well,
yeah, the rest of the clan basically.
were they?
Well, probably not, because remember Jacob's wives had the idols. They had the teraphim
Right.
from their father.
Yeah.
They obviously believed that other gods existed. Do you think they stopped believing in those other gods after they got married?
I thought maybe Jacob would make them.
Well, you can stop worshiping those gods, but you still believe they exist. Like, you can't turn that switch off. Like, if I believe that the water in Lake Erie is brownish because I've been to Lake Erie, like, you can't tell me that it's not. I'm just going to believe that it's not. Like, I know that water is brown. It's a terrible lake to swim in.
Uh-huh.
Like, so if you believe that Vishnu exists, doesn't matter if your husband tells you to stop worshiping Vishnu, you still believe that the deity exists, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, as far as we can tell,
so maybe he actually did say big tell.
That's what I'm saying. They wouldn't know. If he said, "I fear God," well, this is the other problem. We don't fully know what language he was speaking in. I assume he spoke in Egyptian.
Okay.
And remember, in the passage, it says that there was an interpreter. So he spoke in Egyptian. There was an interpreter that interpreted it into Hebrew.
Even though they didn't need it, right?
No, they did. They couldn't speak the same language.
I mean, Joseph and his brothers did.
No. Joseph here is not speaking the native tongue. He's speaking Egyptian, which is a sister language of, Proto-Sinaitic Hebrew, which is what these people were speaking. It's the precursor to the Canaanite and then eventually the Hebrew language. They were related, but you couldn't just.
So he had to learn a whole new language.
Yeah, he had to learn a whole new language, and we're going to see later in this chapter that Joseph was using an interpreter to talk to his brothers,
even though he really didn't need. Because he could have just used their language.
Right? But then they would know he's not Egyptian.
I'm just saying.
That's what I'm trying to tell you.
Uh-huh.
Joseph's not trying to give himself away.
Okay.
So again, the dude's using an interpreter.
Uh-huh.
He's not speaking their language. I have no reason to believe that he confessed to them that he believes in their God, especially when we have no way of knowing what words left the dude's mouth.
Okay.
And the words that are written on the page of the Bible that we have doesn't say anything about a monotheistic deity. It literally says the gods, right? So I know that's a long rabbit trail on kind of a non-issue of a point, but it is kind of an interesting point at least. Did Joseph recognize the one true God here, or did he just say something generic like the gods,
right,
which is what they would have expected to hear? I actually put my weight in the latter. I think Joseph probably said that he respects the gods, plural, right? Or else he'd give himself away, wouldn't he?
Right, yeah. Because he would have to be.
Right. They would know because nobody else worships the one Elohim, even though it's a plural, other than these people, right? So they would have to know that he was their brother if he legitimately said that. How else would they know? I mean, how else would that Egyptian king know about Elohim? There's no way he would.
Because they hadn't had interactions with the Israelites yet.
Right.
All right. I'm sold.
Yep. Fantastic. Verses 20 and 21. It's right there. I didn't put the verse number above it by accident. Sorry about that. Right there at the bottom of the screen there. Yeah.
And they agreed to do so.
Yeah.
That's a very short verse.
Well, you can start at the next or the previous sentence if you want to refresh.
All right. And bring your youngest brother to me. Your words will be fighting, you shall not die. And they agreed to do so. Then they said to one another, we are truly guilty concerning our brother, for we saw the anguish of his soul when he pleaded with us, and we could not and we would not hear. Therefore his stresses come upon us. Wow. There you go.
Really nailed that, huh?
Me?
Yeah.
Thanks. All right. So I'm not entirely sure why the brothers would just immediately assume they would be punished for something they did years ago. It sounds to me as though perhaps they had been feeling guilty and were pretty much ready to be punished. Wanted to be.
Right. Well, the other thing too is like, it's not entirely clear what the punishment is yet. Like, it seems like they're under the impression that, like, oh man, God finally got us. Like, God caught up with us finally.
Okay.
And it's not entirely clear what's going to happen, but they're probably a little bit afraid that, hey, we've been locked up in prison for 3 days. Like, maybe bad things are coming.
Did they even believe in God?
Maybe.
I assume at the time when they were doing that to Joseph, they didn't, right?
I don't know. I actually don't know what their level of commitment to Elohim was at this point in time, because the text doesn't really say, right? It's possible they're all scoundrels, didn't really believe in Elohim.
Right.
In fact, maybe that's why they wanted to get rid of Joseph, because they're like, well, this God that gives them dreams, we don't even believe in him, right?
They were jealous
Could be.
that God decided only to.
But they must believe in something, because they, at this point, they're convinced that like God is catching up with them. They believe in some sort of like divine justice coming for them. Yeah. Oh, well, let's read 22 through 24. Unless you had more.
What does it say that?
No. Yeah, it says we are truly guilty concerning our brother, for we saw the anger. Yeah.
Yeah,
It says,
but it doesn't say anything about.
but therefore this distress has come upon us.
Okay.
So they're recognizing that they're being punished for their previous sins. And who would do that?
Oh. Yeah, the God.
Right. Well, again, we don't know if they're monotheists or not at this point. We just know that they seem to be under the impression that the divine comeuppance is finally happening.
All right, I got you.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Bad this is.
Yep, too late for that.
Like pretty much everything I.
No, you're fine. Just keep going.
All right. The 22 to 24. And Reuben answered them, saying, did I not speak to you, saying, do not sin against the boy, and you would not listen? Therefore, behold, his blood is now required of us. But they did not know that Joseph understood them, for he spoke to them through an interpreter. And he turned himself away from them and wept. He returned to them again and talked to them. And he took Simeon from them and bound him before. You know what? I just got it why he was crying.
Yeah.
Because what they were saying was kind of sad.
Well, it was sad, and they're actually like remorseful.
Right. Yeah, I'm just saying, I guess before I was just like, wow, Joseph, you're a little baby.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Right.
But he probably still cared for us.
Right, I think so.
He's probably touched. Wow, they're sad that they killed me.
Right. And they're recognizing their own guilt.
Yeah.
Says that they sinned against the boy, It said, therefore, his blood is now required of us. Which, if you hearken back to the earlier chapters of Genesis, we know that when innocent blood is spilled upon the ground, it cries out from the ground against them.
Right, that was Abel's blood.
Yeah. And there's also the Avenger of Blood that we read about earlier in Genesis as well. We don't have to talk about that now.
Avengers.
The Avenger. When somebody murders another and they need to be avenged.
Oh, okay.
But so the long and short of it is, they appear to be pretty remorseful at this point, and I think Joseph, as you've pointed out, recognizes and is moved.
Maybe now he's feeling a little bit about all the things he's been putting them through.
Yeah, I was curious about that because remember, throughout the narrative, Joseph seems to be a pretty decent dude. Is it possible that he does feel bad over kind of like these trials that he's putting them through?
Yeah.
It's possible that he does, but deep down he knows that he has to finish the task that he started because he needs to test whether or not they're going to give up Benjamin or whether or not they're going to put their lives on the line to save Benjamin.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah, I get that. I mean, I get it now. I'd never put that together before, but yeah.
Right. Now, I was curious when I was reading that, because remember, he's talking through them with an interpreter, and then he has to leave the room, because he's choked up with emotion.
Right.
I was trying to put myself in the position of the brothers. Say you're talking to this king who's giving you a hard time, treating you as though you're a spy.
Yeah.
And then out of nowhere, he just kind of chokes up and leaves the room.
Yeah.
Yeah, he left, obviously, so that they wouldn't see him crying.
Right.
Wouldn't that make you wonder?
Yeah.
Especially because we don't know if this guy really even looks Egyptian.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it would set off any alarm bells, but it definitely might be one of those things that would make you scratch your head.
So how long was Joseph away from them?
That's what we don't know. We know he was in prison for at least 2 years.
Yeah.
Right? And he was, I don't know how long he was with Potiphar before then, but I don't know. I would imagine at least a couple of years, right?
And he was how old?
Well, I don't fully know, but there is, I've seen on the internet, somebody did do a timeline of Joseph's life. They can kind of roughly tell you how old he was at different time periods, but unfortunately, I don't remember at this point.
Well, I think it was old enough that if only a few years had passed, you'd probably still be able to.
So that's a good point. Like, okay, so he's not speaking the native tongue. He's speaking Egyptian. How well could he speak Egyptian? There's no way he didn't have. If I go down to Alabama and I talk to a guy born and raised in Alabama who took French in high school, and he's speaking French to me, I know that a dude from Alabama is speaking French to me versus somebody from France.
Right.
Doesn't matter that he learned the language. I know he's not authentically French.
Right, yeah.
There's no way you're telling me that in the time Joseph has been in Egypt that he learned the Egyptian tongue so well that his own brothers can't recognize the fact that he's not native Egyptian.
And maybe they would just recognize his voice.
That was the other thing. How did they not recognize the dude's voice?
Yeah.
Now, you can make all kinds of facial changes. When he converted from being, a Canaanite to an Egyptian, I'm sure a lot changed. And hell, he's probably wearing makeup right now. You know what I mean? So the fact of the matter is, we don't know what kind of facial changes he had, but can you really forget someone's voice? Like if I heard you talking and you weren't in front of me, let's say it's pitch black in the room, I have no idea who I'm talking to, and I just hear your voice, I'm going to know it's you. Right? Yeah. But I mean, I don't know. It seems odd to me that he recognizes them right away, but not one of them recognizes their own brother. That's a ladybug. I know you're afraid of bugs. It's not going to hurt you.
Ugh. All right.
You know we're live, right?
Yeah, well,
It's a bug.
I didn't want it.
It's like, part of the life cycle of the planet.
I'm all for life cycles if they stay outside. All right. Anyhow.
So, yeah, I agree with you. I think it's weird that he recognizes his brothers, but they don't recognize him. Especially when it's got to be at least a little bit of a tip off that he's not natively Egyptian, right?
A lot of tip off there.
Right.
Was he wearing like a full-fledged mask or something? Did they do that back then?
I mean, there were times when one would wear a mask, but it'd be for like ceremonial purposes. It wouldn't be like something like you wouldn't walk around with a mask. It might be that you were performing a ceremony to like the god Anubis, so you put on like the dingo mask or something, But no, I have no reason to believe that he's wearing a mask at this point in time. Yeah. Should we go to verses 25 through 28?
Time for another chapter?
Yeah, I don't know about that. We're already going to be running up on 2 hours. Remember, these are supposed to be an hour apiece?
Yeah. All right. Then Joseph gave a command to fill the sacks with grain, to restore every man's money to his sack, and to give them provisions for the journey. So they loaded their donkeys with the grain and departed from them. But as one of them opened his sack to get his brothers, there it is in my sack. Then their hearts failed them, and they were afraid, saying, "What is it that?"
Isn't it interesting that they're at this point? I think it's confirmed. They know that God is giving them retribution, right? I was thinking to myself, if I was in their shoes, I'd be panic all the hell. I'd be so terrified because it's not just that God is giving you retribution, but the king of the most powerful nation in their whole territory is accusing them of being spies, and now it looks like they're being framed for theft.
It's funny, when I had originally read this, I thought he was just being nice. You know what I mean?
Well, that's the thing, is it could seem that way, right? That he's just being nice to them, but he could also just be trying to put the fear of God in them by making them think that they're all going to get framed for stealing.
I don't know why they would even come to that conclusion.
Well, because they were supposed to buy the grain.
Yeah, but I mean, they gave them the money.
Right, but apparently there was a mix-up because the money was in the sacks.
There's a mix-up.
Which means it's possible that they're being framed for theft.
Yeah, but would they really think of that,
Well, they were already put in prison for 3 days.
I would have just been like, oh, maybe he's sorry.
No, the first thought in my mind would be, this dude thinks we're spies. He wants to put us in prison. He's framing us for theft, so he has something against us. So he has a case against us. And if we go back there, we're done. We're doomed. We're going to go back. He's going to say we're spies and thieves. He's going to put us all in prison. That's exactly what I'd be thinking. I wouldn't be thinking, oh, what about this blessed miracle of the money that we returned in our sack? Like, no. That's not a good sign. Right?
Yeah.
The Pharaoh is not their friend yet.
Right.
Or, Joseph.
Yeah.
They don't know that Joseph's friendly. They think that Joseph's got it out for them.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, their brother is still in prison right now.
Right.
Simeon. Right? Because he kept Simeon as collateral.
Yeah. It's interesting that you were talking about when they were in prison, trying to figure out, who would stay behind. And it seems like what Joseph just picked by himself, right?
I thought we read it, didn't we?
Yeah, and I'm telling you.
Where Simeon is selected?
Yeah, no, Joseph selected Simeon.
Is that what happened?
He took Simeon from them and bound him before their eyes.
Oh, I didn't really say, yeah. Interesting.
I just I
So
just assumed he.
it could be.
Well,
Yeah.
do we know anything about Simeon that would make him a good choice?
Well, interestingly enough, so I mean, according to the documentary hypothesis, which we've talked about quite a bit about the different editors,
Yeah.
Joseph is a favored child of the North, of the Elohist editors, and the entire Joseph narrative basically references God every time as Elohim, never as Yahweh. So Joseph is like the guy, right? Now, there's some other tribes, interesting, that are associated with the North, which are really interesting. And if I remember correctly, the other one is Simeon. Simeon has some sort of connection with the Northern Territories, which is why, maybe he's selected here. But this is all pure speculation. I actually, Simeon at one point. Let me get my ducks in a row here. If I remember correctly, Simeon, when he gets his allotment of land, is actually within the borders of Judah. Once Judah gets too big, it swallows up Simeon.
Oh.
So, no, just ignore all my pure speculation here. I have no idea why Simeon was selected.
All right.
There might be a deeper meaning. There might be a reason why the narrative read this way, but I can't think of one at the moment.
Well, I know there were two people that were trying to kind of save Joseph. There was Reuben, right?
Reuben and Judah.
Oh, it wasn't Simeon?
No, I think it was.
Wasn't
it
Simeon
Reuben?
just one of the guys that massacred that town then?
See, we keep getting Reuben and Simeon mixed up.
Yeah.
I think it was Simeon and Levi that massacred the town, wasn't it?
Okay.
That'd be interesting. I think it was Simeon. Let me just check.
All right, let me pause this.
It's Genesis 34.
All right.
It was Simeon and Levi, I thought, that massacred Shechem.
No more.
Well, I mean, we're both forgetting details as we're going through this.
Right.
All right. So it says, then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have brought trouble on me by making me odious to the inhabitants of the land." So Simeon and Levi were the two people that commit this horrendous crime.
And it was Reuben and Judah.
Right, and
later.
It might seem that way. What's interesting, though, is that the narrative of Joseph is near and dear to the hearts of the northern tribe and appears to have come from the northern tribe. So I'm curious if maybe the exaltation of Judah there, when Judah tries to get them to not kill their brother, I wonder if that was added later to the text by a scribe. We're like, we got to make Judah look good somewhere in here.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe it started out as strictly a northern text that the kingdom of Judah just kind of like, well,
yeah,
let's give them something, right? But the question remains, what does Simeon have any significance here?
Right. I mean, there were a lot of brothers he could have chosen.
Right, and I don't fully know. I don't fully know if there's any significance here. Like, I bet you if you ask the right scholar, they're going to have an opinion on this, because this is the type of stuff that scholars will debate endlessly and bore everybody else to sleep. But I can almost guarantee you that like someone like Noel Friedman or somebody of that nature has an opinion on this. I'll look it up and then I'll have an answer for next week.
All right.
But yeah, at the current moment, I'm not entirely sure what the significance of Simeon is. But I'm glad you asked, because I think we should find out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to crack this open.
That's what we're going to do.
And we'll co-author a book about.
Yes, about the Simeon situation.
Yep. All right.
I think we read 25, 28, right?
Yeah, no, we didn't read that.
Okay, so we're doing 25 through 28.
Yep.
All right, let's have it.
And Joseph gave a. Oh, yeah, we just read that. All right.
All right, 28 through 36.
Why did you let me read it?
I trusted you.
Don't do that.
I know I shouldn't.
All right. Then they went to Jacob their father in the land of Canaan and told him all that had happened to them, saying, "The man who is Lord of the land spoke roughly and took us." Okay.
It almost sounds like they're crying. I know it's just a bad English translation, but it sounds like they're crying about it.
He's mean to us.
Exactly.
We are honest men. We are not spies. We are 12 brothers, sons of our father. One is no more, and the youngest is with our father this day in the land of Canaan. Then the man, the lord of the country, said to us, "By this I will know that you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers here with me. Take food for the famine of your households and be gone. And bring your youngest brother to me, so I shall know that you are not spies, but you are honest men. I will grant your brother to you, and you may trade in the land." Then it happened as they emptied their sacks, that surprisingly each man's bundle of money was in his sack. And then they and their father saw the bundles of money. They were afraid. And Jacob their father said to them, "You have bereaved me. Joseph is no more. Simeon is no more. And you want to take Benjamin? All these things are against me." Hey, do you think Simeon was like maybe third youngest?
Oh, you mean like what order did he come in?
Yeah.
I don't remember the order,
I'm
but
just wondering.
in my Bible it does have a layout of the birth order. Let me grab that real quick. We remember that Reuben was the eldest.
Okay.
Right? And then he slept with his father's concubine. You know, that's not supposed to happen. And then of course we've got the others, but I never remember the others.
Yeah.
What order they fall in. But we can try grabbing it here real quick.
I mean, Jacob even mentioned Simeon. So, I mean, it seems like maybe he cares about. Probably be like, You know what I mean?
Yeah, that brings up a good question. Was Simeon selected because he was favored for some reason, or was he selected to punish as the unfavored brother?
Why would you punish a favorite brother?
That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
What if Joseph did not like Simeon?
Oh.
And therefore selected Simeon to be the one. So here's the breakdown.
I bet Simeon is third youngest.
All right, let me check. All right, so in the narrative here, the first wife is Leah, and then Rachel, and then Zilpah and Bilhah. But that wasn't the order that they started having children, was it? We can grab the chapter though. Do you remember which chapter the children are listed?
You know I don't. But I'm just gonna.
It was like 29.
Yeah, that was it.
Somewhere around there.
Exactly 20.
It's definitely before 29. Actually, it's pretty close.
Oh, this Simeon was like right after.
It was 29. My memory's a strange place. All right, so it says in 29, Laban gave his maid Bilhah to his daughter Rachel to be her maid. So Jacob went into Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah. Then he served Laban 7 more years. When the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. Leah conceived and bore a son. So it looks like Leah had the first child. That was Reuben. First, she said, because the Lord has looked upon my affliction. So Reuben was first. And then it says she conceived again and bore a son, because the Lord has heard that
Hey, wait. Oh,
I am.
go ahead.
So, and then the next son is Simeon.
There you go. All right. So maybe what's going on is Simeon is, he's the oldest son now. The one that would, you know what I mean?
Well, Reuben's the oldest.
Yeah, but he doesn't count because sex with.
Well, he got knocked down.
So he's done. So now, Simeon would.
Well, kind of. The only thing is, when we read the rest of the narrative, Reuben himself is the one that wheels and deals with his father, saying that if something happens to Benjamin, it'll be on my head.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems to be, at least up to this point, Reuben is still kind of in charge.
Okay.
It's not until Jacob gives out his blessings that he kind of kicks Reuben in the shins and knocks him down.
That was later.
That's later, yeah.
Oh. And so at this point in the story, do we know that Reuben did what he did?
Actually, I don't know if we're told yet if he did. We read the narrative of him sleeping with the concubine yet? I forget. The chapters of Genesis are starting to blur together. Yeah. Just like Google, Reuben.
This is 35.
So we already read it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I don't know. It was. I think it was a good guess.
Right. So yeah. So that was a good guess. We still don't know why Simeon was chosen. But maybe it'll become clear later.
Yeah.
All
right.
Sometimes you get the answers. Sometimes you just get questions.
That's right. That's what our slogan should be.
Right.
Got anything else?
Well, my only thought on this passage was it seems pretty clear that they're all terrified, as they should be. And Jacob is terrified that his sons are in deep, deep trouble with Egypt as well.
Yeah.
And I don't blame him. If my sons went into Egypt and, came back appearing to be one more brother less.
Right.
And also appearing to have stolen from the Egyptian government.
Yeah.
I'd be a little worried.
Right, we're packing up.
Right. Which
still got 10 sons. We're good.
I think it explains why they didn't return to Egypt right away. There's actually a pretty considerable amount of time that passes between when they come back with, their sacks.
Talking about it was like the next day, wasn't it?
No.
How do you know this?
Yeah, so we're in 42, and remember at the end of 42, he says then Reuben said to his father, they were emptying their sacks, so and so they return home, and then it says when their father saw their bundles of money, they were dismayed, and their father Jacob said to them, I am the one you have bereaved of children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more, and now you would take Benjamin. All this happened to me. Then Reuben said to his father, you may kill 2 of my sons if I do not bring him back to you. So he's proposing to bring him back, and then nothing comes of it, right? And then the chapter ends. It doesn't say what happens. Now, at the beginning of the next chapter, it says, now the famine was severe in the land, and when they had eaten up the grain that they had bought from Egypt, their father said to them, go again and buy us a little more food. So they ate all of the grain, all of it. They had, 10 sacks?
Man, I bet Simeon is like, feeling good about now.
I mean, obviously they didn't make that trip all the way to Egypt to have 5 days worth of food. They went there. They probably had,
even more since they had double, right?
Yeah, they could have had a month or 2, maybe 3 months of food.
Yeah.
We don't know how much. They had a pretty substantial amount of food.
So they only returned when they had to.
Yeah, they literally left him out to dry. Simeon was in prison for probably months.
I'm just wondering, I wonder if Joseph actually confided in Simeon and said, hey, here's what's actually going on.
Because he felt bad.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be too surprised. But then again, that doesn't make sense of the latter stories when the brothers are all united
Yeah.
and they still don't know who Joseph is.
Well, he probably said to Simeon, "Hey, don't tell." Right?
True. If you're going to reveal yourself to Simeon, you tell him it's off with your head.
Yeah.
If you tell your brothers before I tell them.
Right.
Right?
I don't know. I almost feel like that's what had to. I mean, how long does it take to get to Egypt from Canaan? Anyway?
Oh, not very long. From where they lived, it was just a couple days walk.
All right. Well, especially since, I mean, time passed. I mean, I'm sure Joseph was like, huh. Kind of thought they'd be here by now.
So yeah, that was exactly what I was thinking. Listen, if they're gone for weeks or even months, at what point is Joseph like, well, I guess Simeon's dead now. We're gonna have to kill him, and I guess I'm never gonna see my brothers again. Yeah, because at this point you think, well, he must have had high hopes because his brothers seemed to be remorseful.
Right, yeah.
So then what would prevent them from coming back? You'd think, well, obviously they're going to come back. Was Joseph not smart enough to realize that they would be terrified to come back?
Yeah, I don't know. Just think all of his.
Right. So nevertheless, it looks like they were prevented from going back by their father, who didn't want the youngest to be killed. And then it wasn't until their father was like, damn it, we're out of grain again. Go get some more grain, guys.
Or all my sons.
Yeah, right. Anyways, yeah, so let's just read.
I just hate to be Simeon,
Yeah.
Nobody loves me.
He rotted there for a while,
I think
actually.
Joseph probably helped. I really do.
It's hard to say. Joseph is a good guy in this narrative.
Yeah.
Now, I kind of read over 37. I kind of skipped ahead a little bit.
Did.
But I want to read it again
right.
because this is really interesting. In Genesis 42:37, when there's a negotiation with Jacob as to whether or not he's going to be allowed to go back.
Yeah.
Then Reuben spoke to his father, saying, "Kill 2 of my sons if I do not bring him back to you. Put Benjamin in my hands, and I will bring him back to you."
And wouldn't you hate to be his sons?
Yeah.
I'd be over there going, what? What did I do?
Yeah. What person in their right mind is going to be like, listen, if my brother doesn't come back, I'll let you kill 2 of my kids. A deal's a deal.
Right.
Come on. What are you, insane? Just offer up your 2. And here's the other thing. I thought about this for a minute. I thought, you know what? There's no way Reuben nor Jacob believed that deal was sincere.
Oh, yeah.
Because what's Jacob going to do? Kill 2 of his grandchildren?
Right.
This is freaking grandchildren.
Yeah.
He's not going to kill his grandchildren. So I have to assume that this is just, Reuben pleading to the extreme. What more can I plead to show that I will guarantee I will come back with my brother? And this is kind of like the equivalent of like swearing on your mother's grave.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Yeah.
I don't believe that Reuben was sincere about this, obviously, or that even Jacob believed that he would be sincere about this. But to your point, what if you're one of those sons? What if you overheard this damn conversation?
Yeah.
And you overheard your father saying, well, you can kill one of my 2 sons. Or both of them, sorry, because I think there's 4. He's got 4 sons, according to Genesis. So I'll be like, all right, well, you can get half of them. That's crazy.
I'd be like, all right, I am out of here.
Oh, let's read 38.
All right. 38. But he said, my son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is left alone. If any calamity should befall him along the way in which you go, then you would bring down my gray hair with sorrow to the grave.
Yeah.
Yep.
You kind of have to wonder, what kind of mental, calculus Jacob is doing here. Because on the one hand, you're like, well, we left Simeon there for a long time. He might not be coming back. We don't send somebody for grain, we're all going to die here anyways. If I send my, 10 delinquent sons back to Egypt. It's possible that all of them will die.
Yeah.
You know, he had to have been weighing lots of different options, thinking, okay, what would be the least worst option here? Because all the options seem pretty bad right now. I just wonder what that would be like to be a father and saying, well, which of my sons am I willing to sacrifice so that we, we don't all die here from the famine? That's a tough one. The other thing too, as I was thinking about the sons, where Jacob is like, he's so worried for his children, I'm sure. But when is he ever worried for Dinah ever again?
Well, it's not like Dinah part of any.
That's what I'm saying. Why isn't she part of any of this? Why is it that Dinah literally never comes up again when her narrative led to the entire destruction of a whole town? Like, that's kind of a big role that you had there, isn't it? Like, that's not a minor character. It just seems odd to me that we've got all these narratives about the 12 sons, and the only time their sister shows up, she could be the only sister, we don't even know.
Yeah.
The only time Dinah shows up is to say, well, she kind of got raped by Shechem, and then we had to go kill all the Shechemites. It just seems like the author of Genesis not too keen on women.
Fair though. This is the story of the brothers.
I know.
And Dinah's story. I imagine, say there were other daughters. I'm sure they all had lives, did all sorts of kooky things. It just happened that one of Dinah's things overlapped with brothers, so they had to discuss it.
What? Okay. What if Jacob, because this is what you would do with your daughter, just like, straight up married her off to the highest bidder, which wasn't very high because she was a rape victim.
Oh.
But let's just say after the situation, he's like, well, let's just sell her off. Let's get the bride price if we can. And then maybe that's why we never hear from her again. She wasn't around. She got sold off to somebody. She got sold off to one of the local Canaanites.
Like to the family then? Or?
Well, I don't know. It could be. Could be that she was an embarrassment. Could be that she was just damaged goods. It could be that whatever value she had because she used to be a virgin, but now she's not a virgin, is gone.
Mm-hmm.
What if the reason why we never hear from Dinah ever again is because she ain't around?
That's a good point. I think we just don't hear from her.
Yeah, that's the most likely scenario, isn't it? Oh man, I honestly, that's the real answer. But I want justice for Dinah.
Well, she got a whole book, all right?
I know, and you never read it because you're a slacker, but it's okay.
It was called what, the Red Tent or something?
Yeah, the Red Tent.
I read about a chapter.
I know it's not for everybody. Don't worry.
No, it really isn't.
No, it's if you don't like historical fiction.
I just don't like books.
Yeah, you're not gonna. Well, that's another problem, right? Nevertheless, I think you're right on Dinah. I think that's why we don't see her again. Not because she got married off.
Right. Yeah.
Most like she could have lived destitute the rest of her days as an unwanted, rape victim, kind of like when Amnon raped their brother Tamar or sister Tamar, and then she was basically kind of locked away the rest of her days.
There you go. I assume we read about that.
Yeah, we haven't read about that yet. That comes up later. That's
you're making me feel like I should know that.
No, that's one of King David's kids.
Okay, well then I don't know when that will be.
It reminded you of the Judah and Tamar narrative.
Yes, actually it did.
Right.
Yeah, because of the same name.
It's funny that
I'm trying to figure out where that went.
When you have the name Tamar, all I'm telling you, you got to watch out.
Yeah.
Someone's gonna come and get you. Things don't work out if your name is Tamar.
Don't name your children that.
All right. Well, we've been here for 2 hours. We finished our chapter,
We did. All right, let's next one.
and I think it's bedtime is what I
Yeah.
think. I mean, I would love to go all night
Okay.
until we fall asleep reading the Bible together. It's my favorite thing to do.
Uh-huh.
But I suppose we have to give the viewers a break at least.
I mean, yeah, the viewers.
So next week we're going to continue the Joseph narrative. In fact, we're going to try to do 2 chapters next week and try to get the narrative condensed into one as much as we can, especially because when you're reading long narratives and you split them up over a matter of weeks, you forget all the details that previously happened. So we're going to try to cover as much of the Joseph narrative as we can there. But thank you for being here. And yeah, we'll see you next week, right?
I believe so. Yep.
Yeah, sayonara.
Bye, guys.
Cheers. Auf Wiedersehen. Tschüss.